Hello, hello, and welcome to Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. We are your messy, imperfect homeschool mom friends. I'm your host, Amanda, and my awesome co host is
Hello, I'm Megan.
perfect. So, the end of the year is always chaos in our homes, and there's just not enough time or, frankly, motivation. So, we've got some unfiltered bites coming your way. It's still great content, but not nearly as long as our typical episodes. And then, we'll dive back into our full length episodes and book clubs and all of that good stuff in January once we get past the crazy of November and December. So, I think we might have forgotten to mention during our last episode, but we will make sure to turn all of these unfiltered bites into stories on social media and, blog posts eventually. That's more work, but we will make sure that they all end up in places where you can find the links and those kinds of things, as well as there will be links and additional notes in all of our show notes as well. So just to make sure that we're all trying to make things in life easy, right? None of us need to be more overwhelmed with anything at this point. So, yeah, hopefully you get a lot out of it, and you can always refer back to the show notes for specific links if you need it.
So, today we will be talking about cameras. DSLR cameras and mirrorless cameras make great gifts for the holidays, but they're also just an amazing complement to your regular homeschool life, whether it's a nature scavenger hunt or a high school elective. So, we can explore photography, nature, so much more through cameras. So, we are joined today by Audrey, who is an incredibly talented photographer. And is it inappropriate if I classify you as an engineering nerd, Audrey? Is that accurate or insulting?
It's both accurate.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
And
Yeah, no, I own that engineering nerd brain.
There you go. So Audrey's going to share some pro tips for us on what to look for when buying a camera. So, let's just jump in, right? So I mentioned DSLR and mirrorless. What's the difference between them, Audrey?
Yeah, so DSLRs are kind of the classic choice for photographers, and it's generally what everyone pictures when they think of a camera, right? So what DSLR means is a digital single lens reflex camera. So what that means is when you look at a camera, your lens is right here, but your viewfinder is up here. So in order to make sure that the viewfinder actually shows what the lens is showing, there's a mirror that's at like a 45. Here I go with my engineer nerdiness going on. There's a mirror that sits at 45 degrees. So when the image comes in, it bounces up into the viewfinder. So what you see is what you get. And then that whole mirror system, when you hit the shutter, it lifts up so that whatever is coming in through the lens hits the sensor of the digital camera, or I'm really showing my age here. It would have been the film of the old film camera days. So they're really cool. They're durable. They last forever. The optical viewfinder where you look through is really fun for kids because it's kind of like looking through a binoculars for them. And it also, I feel like DSLRs are a great choice for kids because they teach a lot of patience. Like there's a lot of control and settings that you have to do in order to adjust the settings for focus and lighting and all of that. And they're also great for older kids who are ready to dive deeper into photography. And like myself, I'm a kind of a control freak. Like I want to be able to control every little setting to get exactly what I want. So it's a really great way for them to learn how to do things with the different shutter speeds and apertures and all the good stuff. Aperture is the amount that your camera iris opens for your lens. Now, mirrorless cameras, they do the same thing, but they don't have that whole mirror system, obviously, because they're mirrorless. So everything is done electronically. So when you do look through the viewfinder, you do see exactly what the lens is seeing, but it's all done with little microchips and processing on screens rather than the mechanical system of a DSLR. So they're great because they're smaller and they're lighter, super easy to use, great for little hands for young kids and who like to just try photography. Sometimes they could act like a really easy point and shoot, but also with the interchangeable lenses, you can kind of get really creative and technical with it as well. So it's a nice camera to grow up with. And yeah, so it could be a little less intimidating because it's less of a mechanical thing. They're also a lot faster for snapping photos. So depending on the age bracket of kids, you can choose based on those kinds of characteristics.
That was a great breakdown.
Was
In our house, yeah, no, I didn't know either of those things. And I am the classic, like, I just have a point and shoot camera.
yeah.
But my husband had both a DSLR and one of kind of the first mirrorless cameras that Sony came out with quite a while back at this point,
Yes.
because we're old. But like, I didn't fully understand the difference. Like, I knew that the mirrorless camera still had the lenses that changed, but I didn't
Mhm.
fully realize you didn't have to change as many settings. I was really like hands off. Like, I don't know that. I just give me my point and shoot. Right. So yeah, that was really helpful for me, and my
Sure.
non-camera, non-techie brain. So kind of next question then, what camera would you recommend, like a specific camera that would be good for a beginner or a relative beginner? We can assume they're past the holding up someone's phone and taking pictures,
Mhm.
and that would actually grow with them over time.
Sure. So what I tell everybody that is looking for their kids or anybody getting into the photography hobby, when they're starting out, I always recommend just like a very basic entry level body. And then if your funds are available, to really like consider investing in better glass or lenses, because those lenses will always be around. I've had lenses for 20 years at this point, and no matter how much bodies upgrade over the years, you could always attach the same lens because they usually generally keep the same interface. So I know people tend to get really into the specs of like high megapixel counts, and this one is like so much faster than the other. After some point, the megapixels don't count anymore. The speed and sensitivity to dark and night lighting isn't as important because you have good glass that can also help with that quality. So, in terms of very specific cameras, if we're looking at mirrorless versions, I would suggest the Sony Alpha A6000. As you mentioned, Sony is a great mirrorless brand. It's small enough for kids to easily carry, because I feel like if a camera is too large and too clunky and they don't want to bring it with them anywhere they go, then it's kind of defeating the purpose of actually using it. And then it has like a super fast autofocus, so it could catch like those blink and it's gone type moments. And it's great for snapping pictures of wildlife if kids like to go on nature walks and go outside and do like some birding. I don't know. It's kind of fun to capture like really fast speed animals and whatnot. And then I'm a Canon girl, or I was a Canon girl with my DSLR, so I have to give my props to Canon. They have their little EOS R50, which, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to give you the price of the A6000. That's about a $600 camera. This Canon version is $700 right now. It's a great all-arounder, and this camera is simple enough for beginners, but it's like really powerful enough to kind of grow with the skills. So, it's great for family trips and just fun. Fuji is also a big brand name in the mirrorless world, and their entry level camera is the XT30. It's just a little on the pricier end in terms of entry level. It's $900, but it's really cute. It has like this fun retro design. They come in like all sorts of like big, bold, colorful um, designs, and it just kind of makes photography exciting. So it's like really an ideal camera for kids who really are into like the art and creative side of photography. And then when it comes to DSLRs, I say that you can't go wrong with Nikon or Canon. They've been around forever. So the Nikon D3500 is about a $500 body. So DSLRs are coming down in price because mirrorless is so up and coming. But the Nikon is known for like it's really easy to use auto modes. So it's kind of like having a built-in. Oh, and it has like little guided menus to help you determine settings. So it's kind of like has a built-in photography teacher in it, which is really nice for people who are wanting to play. So it's perfect for like older kids who want to learn the why behind the different photography settings. And then I have a soft spot in my heart for the Canon Rebel. My Rebel was my first film camera. It was my first digital SLR camera as well. That's at about 750 right now, but it's so versatile. You could basically do anything in terms of manual settings, and has a lot of great auto modes as well. So it's really fun.
I love that.
Yeah,
That
no, I
was
love that. And
super.
for anyone who's listening and they're like, oh, my numbers, it's important to remember that we are talking about like real cameras that
Yeah.
will last a long, long time. And you're going to get
Yes.
really amazing photos. This is not iPhone photo business, right? Like these are, and you can buy one and have it for decades if that's what you want to do. So truly, I know if you are not familiar and your kid is pushing you and so you're listening because you're like, I think they want it and I was thinking maybe for Christmas, but my budget was not that much. Like we get it, but this is the price of, DSLR and mirrorless cameras. It's an investment because they last a long time.
Definitely. They do. And they do so much more than a typical point and shoot. And I think about it right now that like when you buy your cell phones, they're $1,000 at this point and they last you for 2 years. I know they do a whole lot of other things, but a lot of people rely on their iPhones as their sole cameras. So if this is something that you really want to take control of and really learn the art and the technical aspects of photography, it's just kind of the entry level point. You're going to at least spend $500 for a good body.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, to Amanda's point, if you have charter funds or ESA funds and things like that, you can write up a course that is photography, that is nature photography, that you can loop math in as well. And you can, I know like in Arizona, you have to write a curriculum for your submissions. You can put these things through and include it in your homeschool life. It's more than just a hobby or something fun to kind of throw together there, which is pretty awesome. So, Audrey, you gave us some brands that you love and some specific cameras that you love, which is super helpful. Because for me, if I'm on Amazon looking and I'm trying to read reviews and I'm comparing and I'm like, oh, at some point it's just paralysis. But are there any brands that you would stay away from or things that you would shy away from because maybe they're not as technically sound, or maybe it's something a kid's going to grow out of really quickly? What do you think?
So, in terms of what brands to stay away from, I would just generally stick with the big players like Nikon, Canon, Fuji, and Sony. They've been in the game for a long time. There are other brands, but they're sort of kind of niche, and like equipment is kind of hard to find for them, or you have less options for third party lenses. Like the mounts on these cameras are pretty universal across the brands. And so what's been great about it is that since Nikon and Canon and Sony have such great history, there are a lot of third party lens sellers that make lenses that attach to the Canon systems that are often cheaper to invest in, but still great quality. It's like a third party brand that marries really well. And there's just more variety and options for growing your kit as days go on. But if you pick like a really niche company that probably only has one model or they're up and coming, you're not going to have that level of variety of accessories and lenses that are going to grow with you over the years. You're going to be very limited. And then I'm so like frugal with my electronic spending, but like the resale market, these Nikons and Canons and Sonys have such great resale value, even if they're used for a lot of years, you can definitely get a good return on that investment. So when it's time to upgrade, if your child is like, Mom, hey, my camera can't do low light photography, and that's like really my thing, and I need a camera that has better sensors, but the next body costs this much, you could sell this entry level body and upgrade down the line as well, and it still holds its value. So you can't really get that with some of the other brands. I stay away from that market, so I don't really know a lot of those brands exist anymore, but I would try to stick with the big 3 or 4 that I mentioned.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Okay, so we're sticking with the big names, and they're all names. I mean, I, like you, remember the days of film cameras. So these are camera names we know. But if we're looking at those, what are the specific specs that someone should be looking for when buying a camera? I know we talked about a few specific examples, but if maybe someone is buying, sales or secondhand or something like that, like what are the minimum specs they want?
Sure. So for me, what it comes down to with cameras, because even the lowest number of megapixels and lowest frame rate is pretty good for any entry level user. So I wouldn't get too tied up in those numbers. I focus more for me on usability. So for me, I look for size and weight. Does it feel good in your hands? Does it feel like you can access the controls easily? And that's going to differ from person to person. So it's hard to say, like, hey, if you have only look for 48 megapixels. 48 megapixels can look like this in one camera, it's this big, and then another camera could be this tiny. So something size and weight, definitely, that we want to carry around. You also want to look for easy to use and easy to access features. So when you're, especially for buying for children that are just starting out, or teens and older children who are really diving in, you still want to look for cameras that have good auto modes so that they're going to get good results no matter what they do when they snap the photo. The camera can do a lot of the work for them. And then as they increase their skills and learn the technical aspects behind photography, they could start moving into manual mode. Some extra features that might be nice to look for are like creative modes where the camera automatically changes things to black and white for them. It could add like a little filter. You know, filters are huge right now in every sort of social media setting. So that's kind of fun. And definitely like durability, especially when buying for children. You want to make sure that the cameras have a nice solid build or have like protective cases that can be used with them. And also something like video options. So if your kids are not into just still photos, but want to capture life also through moving pictures, a lot of the cameras also shoot video. So that's a great feature to look for. But obviously, as you add more and more of those features, the prices might increase a little bit. But generally, each entry level has some level of all of those.
And then Amanda mentioned buying secondhand, which for a lot of people is a great way to go budget wise. Do you recommend buying a camera secondhand? And if so, is there anything additional that someone should factor into that search?
Yeah. So I think buying used is definitely a great way to get your child a high quality camera without breaking the bank. But I would definitely be sure to look at really trusted stores. B&H Photo and Video is a great store online, and also they have a brick and mortar in New York City if you want to go, and a website called KEH. So they kind of specialize in refurbished equipment for photographers, and they do like really extensive inspections of the gear that they purchase, and also have like great return policies. So like if you get something, you won't be tied to having it. You can return it within 30 days after you find anything that's wrong with it. And they also offer like really great grading systems for the quality, so and in condition. But when looking at refurbished and secondhand items, I would definitely see if the manufacturer or the store or even the person, if you're buying it from a friend, can check the shutter count of the camera. It's basically like the equivalent of car mileage for cameras. So the especially for a DSLR with the mechanical reflex of that mirror, there's only so many times that that mirror can flip back and forth before you start losing the capabilities of doing that. So you want to make sure that like you still have some good life on that. I shot weddings for a long time, so like there were cameras that could get up to the hundreds of thousands of shutters counts, and I would stay away from something that has had that level of high usage if you want to use it for a long time. And then a good tip for others is to just really ignore the cosmetic flaws of a camera. It's still going to work the same if a little bit of the paint is chipped on the body. But just make sure that all of the glass and mechanical parts of it are working and look like they're in good condition. But absolutely, I love refurb. It's definitely great because then you could save your money and buy other accessories. Because once you're in, you're going to find a lot of good things to go along with that camera that you're going to want to save up for.
Yes, there's
Sounds
always a
about right.
rabbit hole in every hobby, right? It just keeps going. So we talked at the beginning about, we kind of joked about your engineering background and all that kind of stuff, but in all seriousness, right? Photography is a great entree into, the culinary world. There's people that specialize in food photography. There's tons of opportunity with nature, and that can be, from a homeschool perspective, entree into biology and plants and animals and all kinds of stuff. My own kid, almost everything that my oldest kid knows about outer space and astronomy comes from astrophotography. We've got more pictures of the moon and the Milky Way and, all this kind of stuff than I can get. And that really gets into lenses that are oof, but it was a fun exploration for him. So,
Yes.
and yeah, I used to joke, I'm like, you should be able to see the flag that Neil Armstrong put on the moon with the lens that you have at this point. Like, they're pretty intense. But I'm curious, what are some of the ways that right? What are some of the ways that math is used in photography? Like, if somebody is building a high school transcript and stuff like that, and they're more of an interest-led learner, what are some of the ways that you incorporate core learning into photography organically?
So I always kind of giggle to myself about my love of photography because it's more about the math behind it than it is like the artistic creativity. So there's so much technical stuff that you don't even realize is part of photography. But there's so many aspects of math that come into play. So, for example, the exposure triangle, that's how you control the light entering the lens and the creativity behind the photo. It's like you get to measure the shutter speed in fractions of a second. And so you learn about, is 1/4 greater than 1/8? Is it faster or slower if I move in this direction? It's really kind of fun. Um, the way that light enters a lens is actually based on like an inverse square law. But you don't have to know this to do photography, but like just understanding that that's the basis of how your equipment works is really cool. When it comes to composition, there's a golden rule about the rule of thirds. So you can think of like how you break up your composition. Then you can think about ratios in your image and how you're trying to create it, symmetry on how to balance the scene that you're photographing. Also, when it comes to like your lenses, everything is in focal lengths, and that kind of determines what the proportion of your image scenery is and how much something is magnified based on like what focal length you're using. So generally lenses range from like a 16 millimeter to 200 millimeter. And what I love is that like the physics behind it can make a 16 millimeter photo look super wide and even like distort an image. But then a 200 millimeter can make it look like a mountain that's so far away, it's like right behind a person. And that's all because of compression and physics and how your lens, I'm sorry, coming up with words here. Lens mechanics work. I'm an engineer. I'm better with numbers and words. But it's just really kind of fun to see how that proportion affects your image and your creativity. And also, like, how a depth of field, when you take all of that into consideration, you can make a background fuzzier versus more exposing more of the background. And a lot of the distances from your subject, it just, you have to use geometry and math in that way. And then even when it comes to like post production of photography, like when you're thinking of printing, we talk in pixels and like how many dots per inch you can fit and how that's going to affect your print quality. Kids still print photos, do they? Or is that, am I really showing my age here? But like, and then you could also think of like the crop ratio. Do you want an 8:10, a 2:3? It really kind of just makes you think in math terms. And then just generally in creative ways, like your perspective and how you take photos really depends on the best angles that you're shooting. And that's all geometry. So if I get lower, this is how my photo is going to look. If I shoot from above, this is how it's going to look. And even though you're not running the formulas that you learned in school, you're still applying that level of knowledge. And I love that so much, that there's so many aspects of science and math that come into play. That's really nerdy, but that's my favorite part of photography, is trying to get that. It's like solving a puzzle of taking all of those math figures and physics behind the photography and the camera equipment and coming up with an image and seeing the final product. So it's really fun.
Oh, yeah, but I love that, right? I mean, and this is one of those examples. We don't do it as much in our homeschooling, but Megan is definitely that self-directed and, child-led, where if you have a kiddo who isn't super into math and science, this is a great way, if they're more creative and they want to do this stuff, that they are doing that. And maybe as the parent, you might ask them to experiment with X, Y, or Z because that in experimenting with that, they are flexing those math and science skills that they don't
Absolutely.
really realize they're doing in
Yeah.
that creative process. But, it all comes together so well. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. It also really makes you appreciate the math that you learned once you understand why your camera and why your photos are turning out the way that they are. It's kind of cool. It's like, oh, this photo, I really enjoy this aspect of my photo. I love the symmetry of this image. Or I love this image. It looks so cool because, it looks exactly the same if you cut it down the middle and be like, oh, wait, that's symmetry. I learned that when I was in geometry class a couple of days ago, or I learned that just a few weeks ago. It's kind of cool to like see real world applications of all of this mathematical theory that you get while schooling, and just to see that there's a reason behind all of that is kind of validating too as a student.
Yeah, totally.
I love all of that. As Amanda said, we are interest-led peeps over here. And so, yeah, it's been a huge source of learning is creative endeavors like that, or just interest-based endeavors. So I love it. Thank you so much, Audrey, for bringing all of your expertise to our conversation today. I'm sure it will be beneficial to our listeners. That just about wraps us up for this Unfiltered Bite. However, we wanted to remind you that our Patreon memberships are on sale through January 4th for 50% off your first month. You can use code BITE50, BITE 50 at checkout. There's a link in the description, and we'll also have a description down there about all of the awesome stuff that you get with the membership, from live meetings to unit studies and things like that. But in the meantime, that wraps up this Unfiltered Bite. If you have any questions about cameras, feel free to drop them in the comments. I have known Audrey since we are 14 years old. We went to school together, so pretty sure I can track her down with any follow-up questions that you might have and be happy to get you the answers. So thanks so much for tuning in, and happy homeschooling.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks again, Audrey, and have a great one.